I want to welcome you this morning to the McCombs School. President Fenves, thank you very much. Everybody at the university, and especially my friend Dean Hartzell, thank you so much for having us back over to the McCombs School. I'm now going to formally introduce our guests this morning, and we'll have a conversation of about 30 or 35 minutes. Open the floor to all of you for questions for the last few minutes of our time and have you out of here at 9 o'clock. On my left is General John Murray. He is the commanding general of the United States Army Futures Command, a 4-star command headquartered here in Austin, responsible for leading the team of soldiers and civilians modernizing our fighting force. Under the general's leadership, the command is enhancing efficiency and effectiveness in delivering the technology necessary to maintain the Army's competitive advantage and win wars. His military service spans nearly 40 years in top positions and staff assignments at the highest levels of the Army, and he has a chest full of medals to show for it, including the Bronze Star and the Legion of Merit. He's a native of Ohio. He is a graduate of Ohio State University. The Ohio State University. That article, didn't help you against Clemson, did it?
I'm trying to get Evan off script.
Yeah, good luck. On the general's left is Josh Baer, as you know, founder of Capital Factory, the 11-year-old self-branded entrepreneurial center of gravity in Austin. It's a co-working community and accelerator designed to help startups find their first investors, customers, and employees. And for obvious reasons, Capital Factory has linked arms with Army Futures Command from the moment of its arrival here. He is part P.T. Barnum, part Zig Ziglar, and part Billy Sunday. In the tech community, he is a 4-star of sorts himself, and he has his own medals. He's an Eisenhower Fellow, and a Henry Crown Fellow, and a Braddock Scholar at the Aspen Institute. He's a native of New Hampshire and a graduate of Carnegie Mellon, the Carnegie Mellon University, where he founded his own first startup in his college dorm. Please welcome General Murray and Josh Baer. Give them a hand. Thank you. So, of course, as we like to say in the news business, it's good to be smart, it's better to be lucky, and it's best to be both. You can never predict the timing of an event, General, and when we planned this event some time ago, we did not know that the night before we would have military activity around the world, the likes of which we have not seen in some time. And I confess that last night I was in Temple giving a speech. I had an hour to drive back from Temple to Austin. I spent time in the car reflecting on what it must have been like for somebody in your position, with your experience, in your uniform, to watch from a distance what was going on last night. I know that there's stuff you cannot and will not talk about, but could you just, for the benefit of people in the room, before we begin, just reflect on last night and the moment that we're in?
So we were actually at an event in Dallas last night when most of this was breaking. I had a speaking engagement, I think it was about 3:30 in the afternoon, and had to pull away from that for a video teleconference back with the Pentagon, just kind of an early indication of what was going on. And then it was throughout the night, much like probably you, trying to keep up with what was going on through CNN or Twitter, in terms of, and as you would imagine, after the last 18 years of experience or so, a lot of prayers that there were no casualties. And then at the conclusion of when I finally went to bed last night, a lot of thankful prayer that there, in fact, it appears, no U.S., and in many ways, no coalition or partner.
So is that, General, is that confirmed?
It's not.
As I heard last night, there was speculation, there was assumption, there were prayers, but I heard no confirmation, at least as far as...
There are, as far as I know, no confirmed casualties.
Got it. Okay. And we'll see what happens from here. Mm-hmm. Right, let's hope we get back to talking about boring stuff like technology, right?
I'm going to continue to talk about technology because I do think it's important that a portion of the Army, and that's Army Futures Command, stays focused on the future and doesn't get themselves wrapped into the day-to-day business of the Army, which is exactly why we stood up Army Futures.
Right, and the reality is, while we say these things are unrelated, or I say kind of glibly that they're unrelated, in fact, they're exactly related. Right? The work you're doing here is exactly related to what's happening around the world.
It is.
And that's a great transition into our conversation this morning. So the short history of this, I think, is really interesting. It was in October of 2017 that then Army Secretary, at that point it was Acting Army Secretary McCarthy or Army Secretary Esper made the announcement of the intention to stand up this effort?
It was Secretary Esper.
It was Secretary Esper.
Yep.
And it's not as if the Army had not been thinking about modernization before. There had been a conversation internal to the Army about modernization prior to standing up this command, right?
Since about August of 2015.
Yeah. But the difference was this was to be a freestanding effort, right? This was going to be standing up a new command for this purpose.
Correct.
Yeah, right. The motivation to do that was what? Was it an acknowledgement of the need to solve a problem, or was it the opportunity to leverage the possibility of this effort?
It was all that and it was more.
Yeah.
The thought process about doing something fundamentally and radically different.
Yeah.
And part of that was a new command. Started back in August of 2015 with General Milley, and then Secretary Fanning at that point. And it was a realization of really changing world events. We had watched very closely. We did a study of what happened in the Ukraine.
Yep.
We were watching very closely what was going on in South China Sea and continues to go on in South China Sea. We were watching the economic power of the world shift from the Atlantic to the Pacific. We were watching changes to the international order, and we realized that we had been wholly unsuccessful in modernizing probably for the last 3 or 4 decades. And we had become solely focused on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Right.
And there was no unity of effort within the Army to modernize the Army. We realized that we had to make a serious effort and make a radically different change based upon those failures, based upon world events, based upon no unity of effort. And it was the right opportunity to modernize. We just had a 2-year budget deal for 18-19. As we got into this, the last 2-year budget deal of 2021, you go back to the 80s as the Reagan built up. The money was there for about 4 years, so the timing was right, the political leadership was right, not only within the Army in terms of the Secretary, but also within the Congress to make a pretty dramatic move.
Yeah.
And we realized that technology was being developed and innovation was happening at a pace we could not keep up with our current processes and systems.
Right. Technology was moving quickly here, but also elsewhere. Our adversaries, real and imagined, were also moving more quickly to leverage the opportunity that technology presented than we were.
Correct.
Right. We had basically fallen behind.
We were.
Yeah, and we had focused on things like promoting readiness, maintaining readiness, in some cases restoring readiness of our force. We'd had some procurement issues, and budgets had been shrinking for a period of time, right? They kind of turned back up. This was an opportunity for us to put a stake in the ground.
There's a confluence of events at the right time.
And so the theory is consolidate process, streamline work, implement cross-functional teams across a bunch of categories of work that fell under the heading of modernization for the purpose, as you said, of refining combat development, combat capability, combat systems, right?
And it's more than materials. You mentioned the cross-functional teams. So it's a development of a new concept of operations that will eventually become new doctrine.
Right.
It was new organizational structures, multi-domain task force, which we're experimenting right now in the Pacific and soon to be in Europe. Along with the material, it was looking into the future to try to understand what that future could look like and begin to describe that. Right.
And quickly, how many people do you have on the ground in Austin?
Just north of 400.
Just north of 400. And this literally, and the amount of money, pardon me, that is deployed for this purpose.
Well, so Secretary McCarthy calls me the Chief Investment Officer of the Army, which results in a lot of business cards and phone calls.
Right.
Although
you are doing some investing.
So, if you wrap in the entire modernization budget and equipment budget in FY19, the fiscal year we just completed, it was just south of $38 billion.
38 billion with a B.
Yes.
Right, and about 400 people on the ground. Yep. I mean, Josh, think about this. You've been in the business of disruption from the tech side of this conversation for a long time. When you think about, being nimble, embracing change, taking risks, you don't think government.
Not really.
You don't think the military, right?
No.
These are hidebound institutions. The idea that the culture of big government is somehow consistent with what the general has just articulated, that's a pretty big leap.
It is. In fact, it's funny when Secretary McCarthy and General Wesley at the time were coming and doing the search for which cities should be where, they wanted it to be a fair playing ground. So it didn't give anybody any notice they were coming because they went to each city. So we didn't have time to prepare. So the presentation that they got was the exact same presentation we would give to any other big company that was here, saying about how hard it is to work with big companies and how we just said everything with the government's worse.
Right.
And they all seem to buy it.
They nodded. Because it really is counter to the idea that we have all accepted about the nature of bureaucracies, right? Yeah. Bureaucracies move slowly. By definition, bureaucracies in general and government, and the federal government in particular, have antiquated technology, antiquated systems.
I'd actually just really quickly sum it up in why do startups exist at all?
Yeah.
In some ways, a big company or any big organization would have almost every advantage over them. They have more money, more expertise, more talent, more everything else. The startups only have one advantage. They have nothing to lose.
Right.
So they can try a million different things. And the kind of people you hire to run a big organization, they have to worry about a lot they have to lose.
But what big companies and big entities general also have are processes that slow everything down, right? You have to committee everything before it actually gets done. I think of the federal government like a great big steamship, very hard to turn. And the average tech startup that Josh might work with at Capital Factory is like a cigarette boat. Right, you've got one guy, probably a couple drinks in him, who's piloting this thing around, I
don't think you want that from your federal government.
Well, no, but although there have been moments when the federal government's behaved where I thought it couldn't be worse if they were drunk, honestly. But I think about startups, General, and I think about a guy on a cigarette boat taking turns so quickly that they're at risk of capsizing, water splashing up on them. There's something exhilarating
about exactly it.
Right? There's something exhilarating about that. But typically government is operated more like the big steamship, hard to turn, awkward, right?
And so, yes, I agree with you 100%. And you mentioned the word process, and that's part of what we've been chartered to do. And people talk bad about process all the time within a large organization. And I think the federal government is the largest employer and largest organization in the United States. And so I think it's unrealistic to think there would be no process. And so what I have, most of my career, and especially in this job, is processes, roadmaps. But the problem is when people become focused on process for process sake. I mean, process should result in an output that's good for the organization.
Yeah.
And as long as you can remain focused on the output and figure out ways to get to that output as quickly and efficiently as you possibly can, that process is not necessarily bad. But part of the things that we've been chartered to do is figure out ways to streamline, shorten processes to get to the output we're after in a much quicker fashion.
You can be thoughtful and deliberate, but also not take forever to get to the to the decision.
Correct.
Do you have the people around you now? Did you have the people in the Army or in the Defense Department previously who thought that way, who acted that way, or did you have to import talent who were more comfortable with the idea of taking risks and streamlining and all that?
I think it's a combination of both.
Yeah.
People, when I took the command, said you need to change the Army's culture, and I disagree 100%. So 245 years of culture, the fact that part of our culture is you never leave a fallen comrade. I mean, there's a lot of goodness to the Army.
And that's never going to change.
That's not going to change, and even if I wanted to change that, it's not good, and I never could. But this risk aversion that you're talking about is part of a subculture, if you will, in terms of how we acquire things and how we develop things. And it's this fear of failure. So part of this, and it's not going to change overnight, and it's not going to change in its totality. And so this will be a multi-year, if not decades-long effort to begin to change. And it is changing. I mean, Congress is pushing Department of Defense to become more agile. They've put new statutes in place to allow us to do that. We are beginning, in many places across all the services, take advantage of some of these new authorities that Congress has given us to streamline it. But you're talking about a process that fundamentally is rooted in the 1960s.
Yeah.
So it's a process that worked very well for the industrial age. It's not a process that works well for the information age, and that's what's got to
The best indication, General, of what you're saying, living into this idea that we can streamline everything and move more quickly than the Army typically does, is literally you went from October 2017, when this was announced, to the implementation of this in less than 2 years, right? You all were formally in operation by this summer, less than 2 years from the time that it was announced. Hard to imagine that the the federal government or the military operates on such a fast turn.
And we went from 40 people, including me, roughly 40, in August of 18 to a little north of 26,000 by July of last year.
Incredible. Amazing to think about how quickly that happened. So Josh, you alluded to the Austin part, right? The why Austin part. So the process, as I understand it, was there was an initial list of 150 cities where this command might be located, headquartered, in consideration. Then it went down to 30. Then it went down to 10.
And we're always on the top 10 list.
Right,
So.
but still, I mean, Austin is often in the top 10. Was there a moment, General? I can't resist asking about that hand wave. Was there a moment when you thought, no, seriously?
No, actually, because part of so I was tracking this fairly closely. The job I came from was in the Pentagon, so I was close to the decision-making process. I wasn't part of the decision-making
Right, but at the
process.
announcement in 2017, you were not the person yet running it,
I was
right?
not, because I was nominated for this job, I think, in May or June of 17. And once you're nominated, you have to divest yourself
Completely
of
right,
any.
yeah.
And so I was watching very closely with great interest. And there were 5 cities. There were 3 I was totally not interested in,
Right.
and I'm not going to name the cities I was not.
Well, let me name the 5 at least so people know. It was, and then like just blink twice if it's one of the cities you hated. So it was Boston, Minneapolis, Raleigh, Philadelphia, Austin. Those were the 5 that it came down to. So then the question, as the framing of this event is, why Austin? What was it, General?
Austin was one of the 2.
Austin was one of the 2 you liked, right? You want to tell us which the other one was that you liked?
No.
Okay. I thought if I just slid that one in, I might catch you off guard. So, I mean, Josh, what the Army said at the time when they announced the plans to do this was proximity to business, to the president's point, proximity to academia was really important. Now, those other cities have major higher ed institutions. Then if you sort of drill down, density to talent was important, right? So workforce, proximity to science, technology, and engineering and math workers and industries, proximity to private sector, academic STEM and research, quality of life, of course, which Austin has in abundance.
Yes, the funny thing is, though, I think if you compared those 5 cities on those things you just said, it's kind of even, Steven. Right. Like you can argue it, you can debate it, and my understanding is that's kind of where they got to. They're like, you know what, like, any of these cities probably would have worked, was what I was hearing. And now it got down to how did it feel?
Right.
And like the fine differences. And while with respect to the General's comment about not changing the culture of the Army, I think what they were drawn to was the culture of Austin. And the way that what I heard from them was that a lot of the other cities they went to kind of said, well, what are you gonna do for us? What are you gonna bring to the city? And what Austin said was, wow, how can you be part of Austin? How can we help be part of the mission? And I think they felt a different thing from Texas maybe than from some other places.
So this wasn't just, to your point earlier about viewing this as just another business coming to pitch you or for you to pitch this was not like a corporate recruitment necessarily. This was much more a meeting of the mind.
This was Team Austin, like I've never seen it before, honestly.
Everybody on the same page.
Yeah, I mean, everybody, and even more than Austin, it was San Antonio. It was other parts of the region that really all came together and were like, oh no, we're gonna make this happen.
Yeah. General Murray, General Milley said at the time, I believe this is true. This is the first time in Army history that you've ever put a major headquarters smack in the center of a major urban area in the United States.
Oh, absolutely. That was part of the, and Josh did mention the barbecue played into it too. But
it usually does, right? That's it. We sell the food along with everything else.
But we knew this wouldn't work if I was in the command, Army Future, the headquarters was behind the gates at Fort Hood or behind the gates at Fort Bragg. So part of it was the ability, and everything Josh mentioned is true and everything you mentioned is true, but the word proximity mattered, and the ability to walk out of a location and quickly bump into that innovative spirit that Austin is known for, and the ability for people to get in to see us without having to go through a front gate, without having to go through behind fences, and that's.
But again, back to the question of the culture clash here, the idea, kind of the keep Austin weird meets the United States Army part. That lack of a barrier between you and, let's be honest, the Gen Pop, that's a thing. I mean, the idea that you are as accessible and as much in circulation as you all are.
Like some random entrepreneur at Capital Factory turns around and General Murray's behind him.
I mean, it's one thing to say that the Army's going to come here, General Murray, and all of a sudden you're going to ditch your uniform and you're going to have a nose ring. That's not what's going to happen. Nobody expects that. But it is right. No. but you know, so you're not going to go full Austin on us, but. The idea, though, that, Austin is a fairly intimate city where we kind of all walk among one another. The Army is not really set up culturally, I would imagine, to be that close to the people in every instance. And that you basically remove barriers. And that's that's a feature and not a bug here.
It
right?
is, yeah, absolutely.
That's a key component of it. And to Josh's point about, the integration, the Team Austin and the whole idea that we're meeting of the minds, you are really treating your integration with Austin and with Capital Factory where you have a hub of, the President talked about the role that the University of Texas has played as a host. Texas A&M also has a role in this conversation. Higher ed, generally speaking, has been a host. But Capital Factory has been a locus of a lot of your activity, right? You've got 100 over there, is that right?
It was a start point. We're not at 100. We're probably got 30 or 40 people.
But the goal is to get to...
The goal is to get to what we need.
Yeah.
And so Josh has done a great job. So it's just not, and my entity is called the Army Applications Lab, but created a defense innovation space primarily on one floor if we can get the Air Force to move. But the Air Force is there in their element. The Army's there. NGA is there, I think. And so... not just Army, and I think that's created a synergy that, an entrepreneur, when they walk into the Capital Factory, has a solution for something. They just don't know what that solution is going to fit. And so the more the SOCOM element that's similar to Army Applications Lab spends a lot of time in Austin. DIU, the Defense Innovation Unit, has a presence in Austin. So the ability for a young startup or a young entrepreneur to come in and say, this is what I have, and really pitch it to really across DOD, I think is a powerful thing that Josh has set up.
So let me come to that. So this is basically prototyping, concepting. It's almost like Shark Tank for the Army, right? You basically have people coming in and saying, let me talk to you about my idea. And then in fact, if you go, Josh, to the Army Futures Command's website, there's actually a sort of layout of the process, of the pitch process. Come to us with your ideas, submit it here within a certain period of time. We're going to respond and tell you whether we're interested in having a longer conversation.
They're kicking off a cohort next week, I think, of entrepreneurs they're bringing in.
It is literally the case that, like any, tech incubator, you're hosting people with big ideas who want to come in and sell you on how they can help solve your problem or meet their challenges.
I think that the key thing is linking Army problems with potential solutions. And that's really what I focused the Army Applications Lab on, is become the wealth of knowledge of what technology challenges, what problems the Army is trying to solve, whether that's from a program manager, the people that actually manage the acquisition process, or from one of our cross-functional teams. Yeah. And then, listen and connect problems with problem solvers.
The number that I saw mentioned how much you had, this was, I think, Secretary McCarthy said this, that Army Futures Command has an $11 billion science and technology budget. Is that right? Some that will be invested in companies with technology that can change the trajectory of the Army?
That's over the FIDEP, so that's over a 5-year period. So it's roughly just south of $2 billion a year into science and technology.
But again, so we're clear, what you're going to do is become effectively an investor.
But if that was a VC firm, that'd be a $10 billion or $5 billion VC fund or $10 billion VC fund.
Josh, you have experience with this. That is not an insignificant amount of money.
Big
for
firm.
Companies pitching for investment, that is not an insignificant opportunity.
Not at all.
Right?
And there's a trifecta here. It's not just the startups and the government, but there's also now a whole host of new big businesses in Austin that are part of that triangle, because what happens is when a startup gets something to go do with the government, it turns out they can't do it all by themselves.
Right.
And they often need help with that too. And so we're seeing
economic activity creates economic activity.
So the entrepreneurs that are there, they don't just bump into General Murray, but they turn around and there's really, someone from a big Fortune 500 company there as well that they're meeting with too. And that's happening because the Army's here.
And again, the unspoken part of this, although you're saying it out loud, we should just acknowledge it, is that there's a huge economic benefit to Austin and to Central Texas and to Texas in having all this activity here.
Everybody wants to sit next to him.
Had you chosen Minneapolis or Boston or one of the other cities you hate,
Straight face.
they would be benefiting economically as opposed to Austin, so we should be fortunate.
And it's really just starting. These things move slowly.
Right. Josh, does the tech community understand the Army? I mean, we've spent a lot of time talking about whether the Army culturally can mesh with Austin. I wonder whether your side of the conversation actually gets the Army, gets the military.
Well, I immediately said no, we don't get it yet. We're figuring it out. But that said, the enthusiasm is extremely strong. People are excited and energized about it, and they see the opportunity, and they're engaged. And we see that in events like you see here. Every event that we do, it's packed. Every event, over and over, the room is full because there's a lot of interest. And I'm amazed. We thought a year ago, we were thinking, a year from now, what would be success? What would goal be? And we said, 3 of our startups had some kind of business going with the Army, and we're getting some money. That would be in 1 year.
That would be a metric for success.
That'd be a success.
Right.
And I got a list this morning of about 20 companies in our community
that are already
engaged with the Army, with the Air Force. We're talking about more than $10 million of SBIR grant money and other things flowing, real contracts, UT companies like Gen XCom that has a contract with Army Futures Command. There's real business happening already, and that's really fast.
I wonder if any of the hippie peaceniks in the tech community have a problem working with the Army. Do they think to themselves, this is not a business I want to be in, pass? Have you heard much of that?
To be honest, I'm actually surprised that there's been almost none of it. I do think that's one of the differences about Texas is that we have so many veterans here and so many members of our community.
You're talking about a state with a long-standing culture that is associated with military service.
People have asked questions. We're asking questions too, right? It's a new thing, but no, it's been overwhelmingly receptive.
Yeah. And you have everything you need on the tech side of this conversation. You have the capabilities. You've got all the elements on your end of this to work with the Army. You've got that stuff.
Look, I think that would be that'd be a far claim, but I'll tell you what, we're also attracting better startups and better deal phone companies now because they want to be near them.
As a consequence, right.
But just to be honest, I almost think that's the wrong question because when we talk about government innovation, when you hear them say that, they're not actually talking about technology. They're talking about contracts and process and how to buy things a lot of the times. That's the innovation. It's like we found a new way to go buy it. And the technology part is there. There's lots of technology. It's how do they get it that's hard.
General, can you talk about what your own, I asked about metrics for success. What are your metrics for success here? When you go back and you report upstream from you in the chain of command on the efforts of this command that you now lead, what are the goals you're trying to achieve? What are the tangible metrics for success that you are measuring against?
So we are, in terms of, and it is Futures Command, so we tend to break that up into periods of time. So I'll just focus on near term.
Right.
So, in just before we stood up Army Futures Command, the Army announced 6 modernization priorities, 31 plus 3 now signature systems that we're delivering. And so cutting the acquisition timeline, and this will shock a lot of people, from 12 to 15 years to 6 to 8 years for a major combat platform is one of the things. And so each one of those 31 plus 3 signature systems has a associated timeline that we are very, very focused on. Changing the culture in the time I have, and in many ways, all I'm doing is building the foundation for future commanders that come behind me. I mean, one of the first things I did when I got to Austin was open the left-hand desk drawer looking for the SOP, which is always where the last commander leaves it. And of course, that desk drawer was empty.
No last commander.
No, right, so I immediately got all former AFC commanders together, and we all agreed on the way forward. So there is a huge focus, and part of it is changing the history of Army acquisition on those 31 plus in the timelines they're on.
Because the record of the Army, candidly, on procurement over time has not necessarily been A+.
Over a long period of time.
Long period of time.
Long period of time. Right. cultural changes is really beginning to drive within the entire acquisition process. And the challenge is I have some level of responsibility over the entire acquisition process, from idea all the way through divestiture, eventual divestiture of a piece of equipment. I have authority for a very small part of that. And so this concept that you can turn very quickly, that you can fail early, you can fail cheaply, not involving a number that has a B behind it.
Right.
And then most importantly, how do we learn from that? And
right, with no recriminations, right? That is truly a tech community cultural totem, right? Fail fast.
Yep.
Learn from the things that you did. Don't get freaked out about having failed, and then move on to the next thing.
Which we have never done. So our status or the standard operating procedure, I guess, for something that looks like it's going to fail is put more money against it, and just keep putting more money against it until you get to a number that ends with a B, and then it's almost at that point you have to keep investing.
And that's not this.
That's not what we're trying to do.
That's the point. You mentioned the 6 areas, by the way, just for posterity. The 6 areas, if I understand, are long-range precision fires, next-generation combat vehicles, future vertical lift helicopters, right, largely. The network, which is communications infrastructure.
Yep.
Right. Air and missile defense, and what they call soldier lethality, which I think is a great phrase, but really means our ability to go get the bad guys, right, and to protect our guys.
Right.
So those are the areas that, among other smaller areas, those are the big areas that you'll be spending your time focused on.
Those are the 6 modernization
in the 6.
Yep.
Are adversaries changing along with the nature of our battles changing? I mean, we hear a lot about the multi-domain battle environment when we talk about the modernization of the Army. We know that our battles are changing. What happened over the last couple of days? One of the first things we were talking about in the wake of the death of Qasem Soleimani was that the attacks in retaliation were going to be cyber, not. Right. Now, it turned out that we had ballistic missiles last night, but the idea was cyber. I mean, the whole battlefield is changing, right? But our adversaries also, as we think about this, as you think about the...
Oh, they absolutely are. Yeah. In many ways, that's where we were behind in our thinking about a future battlefield. And so, the traditional domains we always talked about was land, sea, and air. And so the concept that we have developed, multi-domain operations, wraps in cyber, and it wraps in space.
Yeah.
And a key piece of cyber also includes electronic warfare. And the phases that we're talking about, the first phase is competition. And the problem we have, I think, as a society is we as Americans, and really Western society, tend to look at history and tend to look at the future as there will be short periods of conflict and long periods of peace. The majority of the rest of the world looks at constant competition. So if you look at what goes on in a cyber perspective, if you look at what goes on in the information space, from misinformation and disinformation, that's the rest of the world looking at constant competition. Not necessarily at the level of conflict, but achieving national strategic objectives well below the threshold of war, and that's what we're calling competition. So that we account for that, and so, and that's not an Army role. That's got to be a whole government role.
Right.
But counting this competition into it is a key part of what we're trying to do.
Josh, obviously the tech community here has played a big role in developing checks against cyber attacks, right, on the corporate side, right? Is the work that's been done on cyber security through the technology community's door thus far perfectly applicable in this instance? Or does it need to raise the level of its game?
Perfectly.
Given the stakes.
I would never say that we solve all of them. Again, they've got all kinds of problems. They're going to come.
But this is an area where there's some synergy.
Highly relevant. Right. Yeah, there's
Need
both on the things you would think of as network security, like hackers trying to hack in and hack into your network, and then also on the misinformation. A company called Yonder that used to be called New Knowledge here in Austin that's really focused on the
yesterday,
social media information.
Governor Abbott said, sort of matter-of-factly in another context, that there had been something like 10,000 attempted hits on the Department of Information Resources, they believe, from Iran over the last little period of time. I mean, this is something that we've now just accepted. We sort of shrug it off as a fact of life now in this modern world. You all have the means to think about that stuff through
And
the tech
Capital
world.
Factory is a target.
Right,
now,
and
too.
then but you can walk across the street effectively or upstairs, and this is something where you can be a help. China or Russia is more of a concern to you right now?
Near term, I'll go the safe answer and quote the National Defense Strategy. So for the Army, it's Russia in the near term, China long term. And that's based upon a lot of things, so demographics, economies.
But China in the long term. And as you think to look to modernize the Army, is there a different strategy with Russia in the viewfinder versus China in the viewfinder?
It can't be. I can't build two different armies. And so,
Right.
As we begin to look to the future, there's got to be waypoints along the way that you're accounting for all this, but there's got to be one future.
Yeah. Josh, what are the big tech conundrums from your perspective that the Army needs to be thinking about or should be facing that will surface in the course of work being done by the command? We were talking the other day, for instance, on the telephone about artificial intelligence, right, as one of many subjects that will be on point here as you think about this.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Some of the biggest challenges, and this plays directly into the previous topic around China and Russia and others, but particularly China, is that in the age of artificial intelligence and these new technologies that are coming, one of the biggest advantages is actually data. It's the information that you feed the technology.
Yeah.
And some of the very things that are kind of very important rights and privileges that we hold dear in America also limit the government's ability to use data in a way that, the concern is it can be used in a bad way, but it can also be used in good ways. And
This is the security versus privacy debate that we're constantly having.
and our competitors in other places don't have those limitations, and they're able to use data and facial recognition and a lot of other things in other ways that we can't.
Right.
And so that's one part. There was an Austin company called a long time ago. It's an old story now, but that had an automated weapons solution that wasn't able to be successful because of challenges, dealing with how do we do that? And our competitors probably will have those types of things. And so that's one big challenge. And then the other challenge is, you asked this question earlier, but with the broader tech community across the whole world, not just in Austin, but all over, how do we help them understand that all technology, all tools can be used for good and for bad? And there's, for example, with AI, yes, there's a lot of ways you can imagine people using AI for bad things, but there's a lot of ways that AI is going to be used to save people's lives and to keep us safe and to make things work better. And we need to be doing that, or we're not going to be able to be successful.
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting subject, I think, and one that hopefully over time we'll have better understanding of. General, two quick questions before we go to the audience. Are you on borrowed time? Funding of anything by the government is always subject to the whims of congressional appropriators, and nothing seems so whimmy as defense spending in the modern era, right? This is a big political football, and we have to go through these periods where the government almost shuts down, and we have to horse trade about whether we're going to fund. I just wonder, to what degree do you feel like a car running at the curb here? How confident are you that there is a commitment on the government's part to adequately funding this in an era when defense appropriations, including for something like this, are just another political football?
So I am very comfortable. So the Army went through a significant change of leadership, but the continuity is there. So Secretary McCarthy fleeted up from the Undersecretary to the Secretary. General McConville fleeted up from the Vice Chief of Staff to the Chief of Staff. And so General McConville's there for another 3.5 years. So, yeah.
And for that matter, Esper, who had been Army Secretary, now is Defense Secretary.
Right.
Milley, who was Chief of Staff, now is head of the Joint Chiefs. I mean, the fact is, you've got your folks in the right positions to advocate for this.
And those are all the people that were putting this whole thing together.
Right. And so, yes, budgets go up, budgets go down. From the Army leadership and really from the OSD leadership, committed to what we're trying to do. Members think differently when you get to Congress. Different appropriators think differently. We go through this CRs and marks but overall, and we win some, we lose some. Overall, over the last couple of years, my time as a G8, my time down here, we have been very successful. We did an event on Capitol Hill last year where members, staffers came and we showed them everything we were working on. We spend time every month on the Hill convincing the appropriators this is the right thing to do. And I think, it's a long, and political leadership changes and.
Well, that's the other question I was going to bring up, General, is you have a presidential election coming up.
Yep.
You may have heard. Doesn't that matter to this effort? If you have a total change in leadership in the White House or at the Pentagon, when Marianne Williamson is president, isn't this going to be weird for you?
So I would say success and winning matters. Yeah. So the early success, showing what we can do, the realization that we have, we've got to modernize. That doesn't.
So it won't matter who's in the White House, who's in the Pentagon, without regard to party ideology or individual personalities. Do you believe that this is now an embedded effort for the country?
I believe it will remain a priority because the rest of the world has not changed.
And this effort started with the previous administration.
Right, so it's already bipartisan in that respect. All right, so we've got about 12 or 10 minutes left. We're going to open up the floor to all of you for questions. Obviously, there are things that you probably wish that I had asked, and you now have the opportunity to ask those of the General or of Josh Baer yourself. I'll call on as many as I can. Please use your outside voice as we don't have microphones. Sir.
Jim Brennan.
Oh, we do. In fact, we do have a microphone. Pardon me. We have one right here in the front. We have one over there, too. Okay, well.
General, could you tell me a little bit about the difference between DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, and the work you're doing, and how they may complement each other or how they're going to be completely distinct?
So DARPA, and most of you are familiar with DARPA. DARPA has been around a long time. We tap into DARPA. So DARPA is working on specific things that we have introduced from an ASC perspective and from an Army perspective. DARPA, as you know, tends to focus on the longer term in terms of what they're trying to work on. We've got 2 or 3 efforts that DARPA is working on with us. Then what becomes interesting is the transition from DARPA either into an Army lab or to an Army program executive officer. But the relationship between Army and DARPA really has not changed with the stand-up of AMC. I've kind of become the point for working with DARPA, but other than that, it's pretty much the same.
Great. Sir.
Hi. You've talked about a lot of sexy new technology as one of the focuses. Would things that are more mundane, ameliorating expenses from long established processes and maybe upgrading them be, just getting food? Would that be part of what should be applicable for your mission?
It is. So we've gone through processes the last 2 or 3 years that really focus on the modernization priorities, but you can't, so that I mentioned the 31 plus 3. There's 690 programs of record in the Army. So, that's 31 plus 3 plus, you got another 660 or 57 things we have to focus on. And one of the things I think is part of this culture change is when in the past we have strived to deliver the perfect solution. But we're going to be upgrading stuff, and we're going to have to put money into the old car, and we're going to have to continue to do oil changes and change the tires. And so that's absolutely figuring out the right balance between how do we fund everything that's important to us and how do we sustain everything else we're trying to do.
Yeah. So there's stuff that we'll talk about at a high level like we talked about today, but there is a bunch of stuff that we maybe don't think about all the time or don't see all the time that still is also getting
and when they talk about
upgraded.
The examples of some of the things we've seen, it's not just this new way of making a flying car. It's a way to predict when the engine's going to fail in the existing machine.
Right.
And that's innovation, and that saves money, and that's that kind of things that
may not be as sexy, but it's still pretty important.
It's real.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi.
What surprises me is that I've heard no mention of biotechnology today. And I'm guessing that our adversaries are very much into that area. Does either of you want to comment on that?
No, thank you for that, because normally when people want to discuss biotech with me, it's usually over lunch, which just always amazes me. And I didn't mention our Army modernization strategy. So last October, we published a new modernization strategy. And the last chapter wraps in our areas of future investment in terms of S&T. Biotech is absolutely one of the areas that we have labs focused on, and we're beginning to invest for the longer future.
You're not there yet, but that's on the.
But we're beginning to, and so quantum.
On the punch list.
Quantum is another one. So all the things you would think are on our basic and applied research is there, and biotech's definitely
And those
one of
examples I was mentioning, the examples of startups doing stuff, some of those are health examples.
Or
for sure.
biotech examples. Hi.
Morning, General. My name is Rebecca Taylor, and I had a couple of questions, so I'll ask both of them, and you can pick which one you like better. I'm curious how Futures Command is similar to and different from the other commands, and how much interaction you have with them, and how that affects the deployment or the rate of uptick or the sorts of technologies that you might be looking for from the Austin community. The second question I had was, one thing that happens a lot in the development of advanced technologies is it unexpectedly obsoletes other things. So if technology comes along that might obsolete one of the 31 signature platforms, how would that work?
I'll answer both of them with one answer. How's that? So the question on the other commands is very closely. And so working with training and doctrine command is this, and we talked a little bit about this turning of concepts into doctrine. So the handoff of that, and we work the concepts together with forces command. That's the ultimate, and I'm sorry, I'm using Army acronym. So training and doctrine is responsible for training doctrine. So initial entry, all the basic training, all the professional military education that both officers and enlisted soldiers go through. And doctrine. And so from the very beginning, we've been working with them. Actually, there's some co-owned units that we work with. And Forces Command really has all the operational forces in the Army. So over the events, the 82nd Airborne is in the process of deployment. That's all under the Forces Command. They are the ultimate users. And so one of the things I haven't mentioned, that one of the things we're changing is this concept of customer-centered design. And so working with ForceCom to ensure that we have soldiers, our customer, involved in the process from the very, very beginning, from a min-valued prototype standpoint, all the way through the process, that we're incorporating input from soldiers to make sure we deliver a product at the end that they're going to be comfortable with is important.
That's not something you've been doing?
No. I'm almost ashamed to say, but no.
I mean, any business that didn't take what its customers wanted into account would not be in business, right?
Well, maybe that's why we stood up Army Futures Command.
Right. I mean, I think it's an acknowledgement of one of the challenges you have, which is that you probably should have been doing this for some time.
Yeah. And then Army Material Command, the other major command, work very closely, and it gets to your second question. And we're going through a process right now in terms of what do we need to divest? Because you continue to, any program the Army comes up with, 70% of the cost is going to be in sustainment. So the only way you cut that bill down to invest in other things is by completely cutting off all money and just divesting that piece of equipment. And AMC and one person that I didn't mention and you didn't mention is the acquisition executive. So ASALT, Bruce Jetty in the Pentagon. So that partnership is not only between Bruce and I, but across all the major commands is very tight. And we spend a lot of time keeping them up to date on what we think we need to do, and we take input from all of them.
And one of the ways you keep the budget from getting out of control is you have a not to-do list along with a to-do list, right? You have to add by subtracting in some cases.
You have to prioritize. New things and prioritize existing things.
And it may end up resulting in some things that you've been doing not happening.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Thomas Davis, and my colleague Michael and I drove up from San Antonio this morning, and I think I see San Antonio Chamber of Commerce President Richard Perez in the audience. But my question is, while Austin is home for this command, and Josh, you mentioned this briefly earlier, can you speak a little bit more to the opportunities that the region as a whole provides, what with Military City, just a relatively short Austin traffic aside drive to the south, and really why that strengthens the position of Army Futures here in South Central Texas, and which of the 6 areas and cross-functional teams in particular that can benefit?
So the Army's, and I think Evan mentioned this, I mean, the Army's been investing in universities for a long time. So I've been down to UT San Antonio, and I'm living in Chancellor Milliken's building, so I spend a lot of time within the UT system. But that's just not the UT system. So we've got the Army's Artificial Intelligence Task Force is at Carnegie Mellon. We've got a partnership between Vanderbilt and the 101st Airborne, which is in Kentucky. It's on the border of Tennessee and Kentucky. We're expanding some of those partnerships. General Mike Talley, who runs my medical research department, is meeting with Chancellor Milliken today or tomorrow, I believe, sometime this week. And it's all about really not only within the system. The one thing I would tell you is, I mean, there's 1,000 universities out there that like me to have, and there's more than 1,000 small businesses that would like, the Army to invest. I am very focused on finding technology to solve Army problems. I spent the first 6 months traveling to universities, traveling to companies and small businesses, and there's a lot of cool technology out there, but it's really hard to take a piece of cool technology and then go find a problem they can solve. So the last 6 months, we've kind of focused on, let's understand the problems we're trying to solve first, and then so it's this connection of problem solvers to the problems we have. Yes, San Antonio, I was in Dallas. Josh wants me to get up to Capital Factory in Dallas, so there's lots of solutions out there, but we got to make sure we're connected to the problems that are most important.
And you have to be headquartered somewhere. I mean,
Yeah.
but you also have the latitude from here to be in those other
Oh,
places.
yes. Yeah, I've been to San Antonio 2 or 3 times.
All the time.
And I just want to say it for your own sake, because I've seen it. Every time we talk about the vision, they always make it clear to us that they didn't just come here for Austin. They want to source from the whole country and certainly from all of Texas, and they're very interested in the whole area.
We're going to have time only for a couple more. I'm just warning you, and I apologize if we run out of time, sir.
Good afternoon. I'm a Marine, so my voice can kind of project a little out of the bush.
Great.
But with that stated, I joined the Veterans Affairs a while back to help prevent something that I received, which was a traumatic brain injury. One of the unique things about joining the VA is I saw all the preventative care and things that they were helping support with me to prevent the continued progression of that. With the Future Command, are y'all looking at actually being able to predict, plan, and act on like different combat-related injuries prior to it becoming a VA issue?
It's a great question.
So yes, Fort Detrick is where our medical research goes, the Surgical Institute, and there's lots of so being able to prevent, so new headgear, new ways of designing headgear, new techniques, partnering with some companies and not through Josh, obviously, that design NFL helmets, I mean, similar type of, and that's been going on, that will continue to go on, and primarily through that medical research. I mean, so they showed me last time I was up there so immediately following event, a couple new ways of testing whether there was a TBI there or not, or the probability of a TBI, because you're never completely sure right after the event. And so, yes.
But it does make sense, because one of the ways in which you can help modernize the fighting force is to ensure that more people go overseas to fight on our behalf and come back in one piece.
Exactly.
Right?
So
That's probably the most important job that you have.
It's not only TBI, so the body armor. I mean, there's continued
right.
research that goes into that. There's all kinds of research that goes into how we're equipping our soldiers from a protection standpoint.
Sir.
Good morning, gentlemen. I had one question for Josh and a question for the general as well. First question, with startups, the key performance indicator of success is return on equity. And while some problems in the military can be like force projection, streamlined costs, in regards to soldier lethality, how do you measure performance when it could be strictly hypothetical until you deploy it overseas? So I guess for entrepreneurs, how would you position your startup when you pitch it to Futures Command or your idea? And then further for the general, in terms of proving that technology or that strategy and then implementing it, what kind of strategies does the Futures Command plan on adopting to address that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something that we definitely see, immediate interaction on, and it also comes up into play. I don't have any secret clearances or anything, but I think it comes into play in that same example of if you wanted to talk about something classified, how do you get a startup who isn't able to see that to work on it? And there's just basically a simple translation that takes place where somebody in the middle who does know the Army stuff has to be able to basically make an analogy, and they kind of make another problem that looks like that one, but isn't the real one. So, okay, we're not tracking enemy tanks, we're tracking buffalo. And they do it, and they create a computer vision thing that tracks the buffalo, and then translate that solution to some other area. And I think you could apply that to a lot of different places.
Yeah. And I think that's, a common challenge across a lot of different places. And Josh described what we're trying to do, and that's goes back to that problem curation, is how do you take something that's classified and very, very technical and translate it into something that's understandable by a normal human being in terms of what the problem we're trying to solve is.
Good. Well, I've got one more question. Timekeeper has abandoned his watch, and so I'm going to just take the last question, even if we're past. Go ahead.
Sir, as a old Army money guy and contracting guy, I understand completely the need to frame your problem and then find the solution. That seems a very evolutionary approach to moving the Army forward, and it's vital, I get it.
Yeah.
Where the revolutionary, the great catch-up step, I think, is the answer to the problem you don't know you have. So how do you balance that need, that ability that startups have, a concept for moving you forward with that structure and need to show results of solving something?
So
that's a good question.
Two quick answers. One from solving finding the answer to the problem you don't know you have. So it goes back to this unity of command concept. And so you go back to the old structure, training and doctrine command, which I mentioned, was really working concepts. Army material command was kind of working solutions from the normal lab perspective. And so we put the two together underneath Army Futures Command. So the development of future concepts and the development of future technology in Army Applications Lab, and Josh's organization is part of that. And then from the very beginning, one of the things I realized is these two have to be interconnected. So how do what we want to do in the future drive our technology investments today so that that technology is there? And how does technology exploration about what could be drive how we're going to fight in the future? So we stood up an organization that's it's a matrix organization between the two called Task Force Ignite. And that's their sole purpose in life is as concept writers begin to look into the future and develop concepts, what are the key technological things that we need to either follow, invest in, because it's going to be different in terms of what type of technology we're talking about, but what we need to enable that concept. And then, oh, by the way, as my basic and applied scientists begin to focus on what it could be in terms of technologies 20 years from now, how is that going to fundamentally change the way we fight? Yep. Robotics and autonomy is the best, and artificial intelligence is the best example I have. It's going to fundamentally change the way we're going to fight. And then, so how do you account for that in future concepts?
And to add one more thing onto that, I think while I do agree there's examples of like discovering something you didn't know existed, and a lot of times I think that's often more the solution than discovering the problem. The big theme here has been around speed, how to make stuff happen faster. And what we've seen both with big companies and with the government is if you have a well-defined problem and a budget behind it, then when you find a solution, stuff happens fast, right? Because you can plug it right into that, and there's a team ready to act on it and to move. And if you don't have that, it's a lot harder to find the way and to get to like something happening. And so what I really like about the approach of having well-defined problems to start with is then when you do find an unexpected solution, something can happen really fast.
You can move quickly. All right, we need to move quickly to end this and to thank our panelists, General John Murray and Josh Baer, to thank Dean Hartzell and everybody at the McCombs School. Thank all of you for coming. Please, a big hand. We'll see you again. Thanks very much. General, thank you.